What is up, everybody? My name is Clay Herrell. This is episode 1 of the Blues Breakdown podcast. I am super excited to get this started. Just to kind of, kick things off, you can follow me on Twitter at Clay Herrell. You can spell Herrell Herrell. And I also have a Twitter here for the podcast. You can follow that at Blues Break Pod as well on Twitter or X. I'm super excited to get this going. I think it's an exciting time to start a podcast about the Blues. They're in a really good space. They had a good offseason. They're a young team that I think is kind of ascending and maybe looking to launch themselves into a competitive window here soon. And that's the big reason why I wanted to start this podcast. I do have a little bit of history podcasting before, but first time doing a solo podcast. I'm very excited to get this going, very excited to talk about the Blues. And, I think the exciting thing about it, doing it solo, is it kind of gives me an opportunity to find some guests to talk to. And episode 1, we have our first guest, and it's Alex Ferrario. You probably know Alex from, listening to 101 ESPN. He's on BK and Ferrario every day, 11 to 2. Alex is also the post-game, and intermission host for the Blues on 101. So we were able to talk to Alex for a bit, get some insight from him on the upcoming season. Obviously, just, some transparency. That interview was recorded on Wednesday. So obviously the preseason game against Dallas had happened Thursday. They were coming off that loss to Columbus that maybe was a little bit ugly preseason-wise. But that game Thursday happened. The game Saturday, Milwaukee happened. But nothing really changed from our conversation with Alex in terms of kind of what to expect with this team. But yeah, it's an exciting time. I'm recording at a good time here on Sunday morning. The Blues just announced what appears to probably be final roster cuts. And it's looking like Zach Bolduc is going to make the club. Maybe not something people thought was going to happen with the way Kasperi Kapanen had played here in camp. But yeah, a lot to get into in this episode. An interview with Alex Ferrario. We're going to look at opening night/day, Tuesday in Seattle, and then the rest of the week with the game against San Jose and Vegas. So a lot to get into here in episode 1 of the Blues Breakdown podcast. I guess to start, you kind of have to look at the way the lines were juggled on Thursday before that game against Dallas. It almost kind of appeared that Kasperi Kapanen would be making the team, and I think he still is, and that would be he would probably slot in on that third line with Schenn and Joseph. And that's not to say that he won't come Tuesday afternoon, but it seems like with what just got announced now, it looks like Zach Bolduc will make the team. I'm still the belief that Thursday lineup is what you're going to see Tuesday. And again, that was Holloway, Thomas, Neighbors on the top line. Texier, Buchnevich, Kyrou, Joseph, Schenn, Kapanen, Toropchenko, Faksa, Walker. And then on defense, you had Letty Parayko, Broberg, Falk, Suter, Kessel, and then obviously Jordan Binnington manning the net for you. And the big thing there was Holloway getting elevated to the top line, Kyrou dropping down with Buch, and then Texier, who got promoted to the second line. And Kapanen had that really nice game Thursday against Dallas, and probably could have had a 3-point night if that Suter goal didn't get waved off. But it probably, in terms of production, Kapanen probably earned that role. I don't think that's a super popular opinion with Blues fans. I think people want to see Bolduc, and I'm one of them. I want to see Bolduc. I want to see what he can do in a regular NHL role. I just don't know how much it makes sense to have him there, maybe middle six on the third line. And I don't think with the way this Blues team is structured, not that third line's a bad thing. I mean, Schenn is a very, 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 very capable third-line center. Matthew Joseph has looked pretty good in preseason. So if he would end up slotting in on that third line, I think it would be fine. But again, I think all this is probably for naught just because, Brandon Saad appears to miss the road trip to start the year. So he's going to have to slot back in. And to me, it would just make the most sense to slot him back in for Kapanen and let Bolduc start in the AHL. But maybe the Blues feel different. It looks like Bolduc is at least going to start the season up with the big club. He wasn't a part of the cuts that just got announced back to Springfield, so we'll see. The big thing, though, that game against Dallas, the overtime win, you obviously don't love that you blew a 3-1 lead, but to take that that energy, take that effort and that production that they had against Dallas, that needs to be what carries over into Tuesday. I know Dallas didn't have their full team, but it was still a great goalie in Jake Ottinger in goal for the entirety of that game. And there were a good chunk of NHL guys there. That's the effort that they need. I think that was kind of maybe Drew Bannister's issue for most of the preseason. It just didn't look like a lot of guys were doing their role. I think he used the term that we had some passengers, maybe guys just along for the ride, not getting in and driving the play or anything like that. And I think that game Thursday, everybody was driving the play. Everybody was hard on pucks, getting to the dirty areas of the ice and trying to make something happen. And to me, it's just like watching that game, that's the effort they need. I think that was a good lineup they had. I've been impressed with a lot of what the Blues have done in the preseason and what I've seen from them. Dylan Holloway being one of them, Alexander Texier being one of them. Matthew Joseph has looked good. And I think, that's huge for this team that these new guys are coming in and making an impact right away. You're not having to wait and see, and they're kind of like, oh, well, we told you this will work out. Kind of like 2018-19, you brought in all those guys, and this is obviously not the same scenario. Very, very different expectations for this group. But you saw in 18-19, quite a few new guys come in. It took a while to gel. Hopefully that's not the case with this group. I don't think, obviously, you're going to be looking at a team that they're talking about as a Stanley Cup contender. They're a fringe playoff team, if we're being completely honest, if we're getting to that part of it. But to become a fringe playoff team, to get to that point, it starts Tuesday. It starts at 3:30 Central Time, a weird start time, but it's on ESPN in Seattle. The Blues taking on the Kraken. I think that's obviously where it all starts. You have to be able to put forth a good effort for 82 games, and it starts Tuesday. And Seattle's not going to be one of those teams that, they're the new expansion team and they rolled over. That's a good squad. They got Matty Beniers up front. Dropped off a bit last year. It was a second full season, sophomore slump. And I say sophomore slump. He did have the 10 games as technically, I guess, his first year, but it was a second full season. Wasn't the best production. I know he's banged up a bit as well. But a couple big additions the Kraken brought in. Chandler Stevenson played for Washington, probably most recently everybody knows him playing for Vegas. In 23 career games against the Blues, he's got 4 goals and 13 assists. He's a +8. So Chandler Stevenson will be a guy that Tuesday you probably have to watch out for. I'm assuming he's going to slot in that second-line center role behind Beniers for the Kraken. But Stevenson, big pickup for them. And then another big pickup, they brought in Brenden Montour back on their back end. He'll probably play second pair for them. And it's a guy that just won a Stanley Cup, probably looking to prove, like, hey, he earned his money. He's coming out to play. He looks like he'll be paired with Jamie Alexiak. On that second pair, obviously their first pair being former Blue Vince Dunn and Adam Larson, and then third pair defense, Riker Evans and Will Borgen on defense for the Kraken. Looking like the way things will slot for them, their top line of McCann, Beniers, and Bjorkstrand. That'll be a problem. That's an offensive power, like it's a good offensive line. Jared McCann kind of gives them that two-way defensive element, but Beniers and Bjorkstrand are goal scorers that you have to watch out for. Tolvanen, Stevenson, Burakovsky, another really good scoring line. And then the third line, though, I like, and maybe the most intriguing by is Jaden Schwartz, Shane Wright, and Jordan Eberle. That's a line that if the Blues aren't careful could burn them on Tuesday afternoon as things get going. And obviously in goal they'll have Philip Grubauer, but as backup Joey Daccord, who had a good year, I don't think, obviously, unless the Blues pile it on early, that we see Joey Daccord in that game. But yeah, I mean, the Blues just have to come out right away. You have to have a strong start. I think no matter what the expectation is of the team, and I don't think the Kraken had those Stanley Cup expectations, but when it comes to game one, everybody has Stanley Cup expectations. Everybody thinks they can win the Cup. There's hope. And so the crowd's going to be energized. I know it's a 1:30 start. It's going to be a weird start time there, local in Seattle. But you have to come out and take the crowd out of the game. Even if it doesn't result in a goal, just hem them in, generate chances, and just get your cycle going. And if you score a goal, I mean, that's huge to take the crowd out of it. And, like I said, taking them out of it, using, not letting them use the energy from the home opener, and excited to get the season started. It's the first game in North America. Obviously, the Devils and Sabres just opened in the Czech Republic, but this is the first, the season opener here in North America to be in Seattle. So, sustain pressure early, take them out of it, and I think that'll be big for the Blues. And if they can get the crowd out of it, I think that'll kind of allow them to settle into the game. I'm sure there's going to be some nerves on opening night, but yeah, look for a strong first 10 minutes, get the crowd out of it, and maybe the Blues will be well on their way to hopefully picking up an opening night win. Now that we've talked about opening night, let's send it over to our interview with Alex Ferrario. We talked to Alex just about different storylines in camp, what to look out for this team just as a whole over the season. We talked about Philip Broberg. We talked about Dylan Holloway. So Alex has been out at camp quite a bit. He's had some conversations with different people around the Blues, so he gave us some pretty good insight about what to look for with this team this season. So let's go ahead and send it over to Alex Ferrario. I am super excited. Episode 1, we got the first guest on the podcast, and it is the one and only Alex Ferrario. You can hear Alex pregame, intermission, postgame during all Blues games on 101 ESPN. You can hear him weekdays from 11 to 2 on BK and Ferrario on 101. Alex, how you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. I actually feel bad. You're You're ruining your podcast by having me as your first guest, but I appreciate you reaching out, Clay. I'm looking forward to doing this.
No, man. Hey, I've been listening to your thoughts on this team, and I think we think similarly about kind of how we feel about the Blues going into this year. So I wanted to get your thoughts. But before we dive into that, man, you're coming off a night where you just did play-by-play filling in for Chris Kerber. So how was that for you doing that game against Columbus last night?
It was good, man. It was good. So the first time that I got to do play-by-play for the Blues was back in 2019. Kind of a similar situation where Curbs was earning a award at the MIC, I believe it was, and he surprised me by telling me that I was going to be doing play-by-play for that game. And when I got into this business back when I was at Lindenwood, my main goal was to be a play-by-play broadcaster, and as this business goes, you kind of evolve as you go along. And the more I wanted to do play by play, the more opportunities opened up of getting to host different things on KMOX. And I got to do some pre and post on the weekends and hosting some sports talk shows. And I just kind of fell in love with it. So play by play has always been a passion of mine. I've always loved hockey and basketball. They've kind of been my two main passions with play by play. But as this business goes, it just kind of evolved. So it was placed in the back burner for the longest time once I started at KMOX in 2013. And 6 years later, Chris Kerber, who has been one of my biggest mentors in this business, he surprised me and got that opportunity. And then 5 years later, he called up me again. And it was very deserved for Curbs. His daughter was having senior night at a volleyball match. And so he needed to be there. And I was just glad that I could help him. And it's cool to get to kind of fulfill a passion of mine once again getting to call blues hockey.
My biggest takeaway there is the first time you did it was in 2019, and that season ended up all right. So maybe we're on the right track here.
Yeah, I unfortunately it wasn't the 2018-19 season. It was
It
the
was the year after.
2019-20 season. So actually I'll go the opposite of that, Clay.
Yeah.
The last time I did this, a pandemic happened a couple of months later. So fingers crossed that that is not going to be a trend for me, because there goes my play-by-play career.
When you look at the offseason the Blues had, and to me, and I think it's kind of obvious, but it seemed like two separate off seasons. You look at July, and I don't want to say I was concerned, but maybe more confused. They bring in Matthew and P.O. Joseph, they bring in Radek Faksa, and then they bring in Ryan Suter. What were your thoughts before August 1st, kind of on where this team was headed and maybe the direction and the way things were going to look going into this year?
I actually wasn't surprised by when they were made, mostly because it fell in line with what the Blues were saying. They kept calling it a retool. The year prior, they went out and they brought in Jakub Vrana and Kasperi Kapanen, and it was placeholders for the Jimmy Snuggeruds, the Dvorskys, the Buldukes, and you knew what they were doing. They were getting guys to just fill a gap until they were actually able to bring those younger players up. So when they acquired Matthew Joseph from the Ottawa Senators, I said, okay, that's a bottom six forward, probably somebody that can fill a void for them until a Zach Dean or an Otto Stenberg is ready. But it's also a guy that brings a heavy forecheck and has a presence of himself. And then when they traded for Radek Fox, it was like, okay, well, maybe the Blues are just becoming a salary dump team to where, hey, you take on a couple of bad contracts, it helps us, but it also helps the future. And then when they got Ryan Suter, I'm like, okay, this one seems a little odd because we didn't know the Torrey Krug information at the time. You bring in a Ryan Suter. Why would a Ryan Suter want to play in St. Louis? At that time, it was starting to be like, okay, maybe the Blues are actually trying to, I don't want to say compete, but trying to at least stay competitive by bringing in some veterans who can move along their younger players. And then as we found out, Doug Armstrong was trying to be even more aggressive when he brought in the two players from Edmonton, but it actually fell in line with what I thought the Blues were trying to accomplish in terms of just kind of biding their time until they could get those younger players in the lineup. And boy, then once those moves happened in August, it was like fast forward into what they're trying to accomplish sooner.
And still at that point, you obviously knew there was something up with Torrey Krug, but even with Broberg and Holloway coming in, it wasn't, 100% certain that there was going to be no Krug all year. It was maybe hinted at. They still got work to do. They got to get rid of some of these defensemen and get off some of those one-way contracts. So, and that time's kind of ticking. I know, it's probably hard to read. What do you think ends up happening with all those one-way contracts they have on the defensive end?
Yeah, so I think as it stands now, there's nine defensemen still on this roster, and the real question is: are the Blues going to go 14 forwards and seven defensemen, or 13 forwards and eight defensemen? My gut tells me they're going to be going the 13-8, mostly because you've got the depth at the forward position. Sundqvist is probably not going to be ready to go on opening night. At least it seems like. Brandon Saad might be staying back on that first road trip because his wife is expecting their third baby. And then so, okay, well, you've got your depth. You've got the Buldukes, you got the Josephs, the Foxes, players like that. But if you go to the defense, I think that starting six are already set in stone. I think you've got Letty Pareko. I think you've got Robert Falk, Suter, and Kessel. And then the question becomes, what do you do with those other three defensemen? Because all of them are one way. All of them have to go through waivers. And you take the chance of sending one or two of them through and they get claimed. If you were to put like a priority list of a player that could get claimed, I would probably say Scott Perunovich would be number one. P.O. Joseph would be two, and Tyler Tucker would be number three. My gut tells me that we've seen the last of Scott Perunovich, mostly because it feels as if P.O. Joseph has been the guy in front from start to finish of training camp as that seventh defenseman. Bannister talks about his two-way ability, his speed, his ability to break up plays, play physical. He felt like the guy that was going to get that first gig. And then it came down to what the Blues needed. And I personally feel like Tyler Tucker has had a more impressive training camp just because he provides something that the Blues really don't have in terms of physicality. Scott Perunovich is a special player, but Scott Perunovich just has not met that level that the Blues have been searching for in terms of his offense.
For sure.
And I think these preseason games, they've still been trying to get him to shoot more. You've still been trying to get him more involved in the offense. And the problem for Scott Perunovich is if you're not going to create that offense or be on the power play, there are other guys that could take your job from you. So it's going to be interesting because I guess the real question is, do you send guys on waivers or do you try and potentially move one of them in a trade to gain assets if you're worried they get claimed through waivers? But if you're asking me today, and it's just a prediction, I would say they're going to have 8 defensemen, and those 7th and 8th defensemen will be P.O. Joseph and Tyler Tucker. And with Scott Perunovich, that's the unknown in my opinion.
And just jumping back to Broberg and Holloway really quick, that just felt like a move. It not only changes the dynamic of this season, but the next 3 to 5 years at least for the Blues. Like, I know it's been talked about ad nauseum. You've talked about it a lot. It's been written about a lot. But what do those two bring to this team that they maybe have been missing, or that'll just be exciting for fans to watch?
Well, I've had to pump my own brakes, Clay, because sometimes it's hard for me to take the Blues fan out of this because the moment that Broberg and Holloway were acquired, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this retool's done. I mean, you were looking for youth. You were looking for guys who could come in and make you better now. And what better way to do that than bring in two guys who just had success in the Stanley Cup final and Western Conference final for Edmonton? I look at those two players as cornerstones for what the future could be for St. Louis. We all know Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, those are kind of the pillars right now for the Blues. And then you've got the Jake Neighbors and you've got the Snuggeroods and the Davorskis, but they didn't have that defenseman. I think Blues fans were looking at Theo Lindstein and trying to paint him into a position that might just be outlandish right now. Like I joke all the time that I was in Nashville for that draft when Lindstein was drafted, and the ESPN broadcast was like, "Oh, the perfect comp for Theo Lindstein is Alex Pietrangelo," and I looked at my co-host at the time, and I'm like, "Did they just really say that?" Like, I understand that the Blues fans were desperate to find another defenseman, but like now we're going to throw an Alex Pietrangelo comp to a dude that was just selected 25th overall. So Lindstein has been impressive. Don't get me wrong. But it felt like you were molding a guy into a number one or a top pair defenseman that was lofty expectation.
Right.
And they didn't have anybody else in their system. Like Scott Perunovich was not projected to be a top 4 defenseman. Michael Buchinger wasn't that. You didn't have that. So the question was, how are you acquiring it? And we've said everybody, Jacob Chikrin, Mackenzie Weegar, Shea Theodore, you've gone through every single name. And then lo and behold, you go out and you get a 23-year-old defenseman in Philip Broberg who goes and scores 2 goals in the Western Conference final and Stanley Cup final. And you look at it and you say, did they just find their guy? Now, that's where I have to pump the brakes because 23 years old, he's played less than 100 games in the National Hockey League. And Al McInnes was one that has said it multiple times to me and a couple of others. Like, you got to see 300 games at the NHL level for a defenseman before you really know what that guy is. So he's got a ways away. but you're 23, you're 6'3", you're a mobile defenseman. There are analysts and writers in Edmonton that believe he had top pair potential, and you just got him for $4 million. So I think that expedites the retool for St. Louis. I'm not going to sit here and act like that they are a contender right now because there's going to be growing pains. But you've been searching for a top pair defenseman on the left side since Alex Pietrangelo and Jay Bouwmeester both left, and you might have found that in a 23-year-old Philip Broberg.
You're like bringing back flashbacks to just wishing on Jacob Trickern coming to the Blues. Do you remember the game a few years ago? I think it was against St. Louis that he was like scratched from the lineup for trade reasons, and it was like just seemed perfect that he could have just hopped locker rooms really quick, but obviously that didn't work out. But I do think now that they have their guy, and obviously, like you said, less than 100 games, a lot could happen, but it seems like you said, there's a good chance that this could be maybe the guy they've been looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think so. He's got the tool set. Mark Spector in Edmonton said he's probably one of the smoothest skaters that they have up in Edmonton, with the exception of Connor McDavid. He comped him to like a Jay Bouwmeester. The offensive side of Philip Broberg's game, I don't think it's as good as people. I don't think it's at the level of people's expectations are. Like, this is a guy that could come up and put 50 points. I don't think that's who he is, but I do think he's a two-way mobile defenseman who's got elite skating skills and the ability to get the puck out of the zone smoothly for St. Louis. And guess what this team's been lacking since Jay Bouwmeester's left? A smooth skating defenseman who can get the puck out of their zone with ease. So, we went through the ringer as Blues fans. You go through Travis Sanheim, who potentially was going to be a Blue. That fell through. Again, it was the Jacob Chychrun. I felt like we talked about that for about 3 years. I talked a lot about Nicholas Hague from the Vegas Golden Knights, another defenseman that I thought could be there, Shea Theodore, Mackenzie Weegar. I mean, Cam Fowler's name was brought up this offseason with the Blues. So there have been pretty much every single left-handed defenseman available tied to St. Louis. And now I don't know if people are going to be doing that anymore, because the Blues might have their top four in place, not just for the now. Like, the now is Aletti and Parayko or Broberg and Falk, but look 5 years from now. That's the part that I think is what Doug Armstrong's picture was. 5 years from now, you could be looking at a Broberg, Lindstein, Parayko, and a Jiricek in your top four. And three of those four guys that I just mentioned are all first-round draft picks, two of them in the top 16. So it's a good spot to be in for St. Louis.
So my next question, I want to preface this because I think you might laugh a little bit. This has been in my mind all summer and just kind of seeing how things have went. But with what's going on at another sports team here in St. Louis, it feels really relevant now. I think people around the Blues, and you can hear them talk, listen to interviews, they seem pretty clear that this isn't a retool. I'm kind of on the fence if it still is a retool or not. But regardless, like, looking back on the last two seasons, how important was the honesty from Doug Armstrong and Tom Stillman to kind of lay out the plan for the fan base and be like, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And now you're seeing that plan enacted. Do you think that kind of helped fans maybe stay on board and support them throughout these last two years of the retool?
It 100% did. And that's why I think people aren't so up in arms with the St. Louis Blues and what they've done, because they were straightforward with it. The moment that O'Reilly and Tarasenko were all traded away, Doug Armstrong held that press conference and said, look, we've got a plan in place. 3-year plan or 3 to 5 year plan is what we're trying to accomplish. But we believe that at the end of this plan, we will open up another competitive window and stay competitive for a long time. Saying it is one thing, but then following it up is another. And if you look at what took place, the season that they started that, they were bad. They drafted Dalibor Dvorsky, but they also acquired 2 other first-round draft picks, and they made those selections. But don't forget what they did in that offseason. They nearly acquired Travis Sanheim from the Philadelphia Flyers. 1, you're being aggressive and trying to make this go faster, but 2, you're sticking to the plan. Then the next season, you bring in a Jakub Vrana, you bring in a Kasperi Kapanen, and those guys are placeholders because you're waiting on Snuggerud and Bolduc, and then the guys you just drafted. But then you go into that offseason and you saw the Blues go out there and be aggressive once again. You bring in a Joseph, you bring in a Fox, a Holloway, a Broberg, a Suter, and now you go into a season. I still believe this is a retool, because for this not to be a retool, your prospects need to be at the NHL level.
Yep.
And it's very evident that if you look if you just look into a crystal ball of next season, go through the roster. Fox is probably not going to be here. Branden Saad might not be here for this Blues team. You also don't, Kapanen's not expected to be here. Sundqvist might not be here. There's a lot of guys you look at and you say, yeah, I don't know where he fits into this plan for the Blues. But you know what does? A Snuggerud, a
Yeah.
Bolduc, a Dvorsky, a Stenberg, a Lindstein. Go to the defensive side with Torrey Krug's potential injury of keeping him out for a long period of time. Nick Leddy might be gone. Justin Falk could be a piece that gets moved. You don't know what this looks like. So until I see a Snuggerud in a Blues uniform, a Bolduc consistently in a Blues uniform, a Dvorsky, a Lindstein, a Jiricek, that's when I'll look at this and say, okay, they're out of the retool. Now, did they go further up into that timeline faster? Absolutely. And that goes back to what you asked. The honesty that Doug Armstrong provided, yes, it was one thing, and Tom Stillman being very upfront with it. But then they also saw a president of hockey operations go out there and stay aggressive and keep to his word of trying to get out of this retool faster. And that's why I believe Blues fans look at this and say, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. And now it's just a matter of letting them cook and seeing what happens. The key with all of this, though, Clay, is you don't know what the future looks like.
Right.
Because it's as exciting as it is now. How many times have we seen players in the National Hockey League have high expectation or high value and them not live up to it?
Yep.
Broberg couldn't pan out. You know, Bolduc might not be that guy. Maybe Jimmy Snuggerud isn't a top six winger and he's a middle six winger. That restarts it a little bit more. Maybe some of the NHL guys don't live up to what Doug's belief is in this team. There's going to be a lot of veering in different directions as this retool progresses, which is why I'm not going to sit here and act like the Blues are now opening a competitive window. I still think you're about a year away from that, which falls into that 3-year timeline that Doug Armstrong placed once he started that retool.
You know, another big story in camp too, and moving maybe to some guys that have been here a bit longer. Pavel Buchnevich appears like he's going to be the second line center heading into the season. You love it, not a fan, and with him at second line center, I feel like the expectations that we should have for him are probably different than if he was playing on the wing with Robert Thomas. So how do those expectations shift with him at second line center?
Well, if you've listened to me either on my show or podcast,
I knew the answer to this,
or the pre and post game, yeah, your viewers are going to know the answer to this. I don't like it. I understand what they're selling, that Pavel Buchnevich, and they have numbers that showcase the success that they've had with him at the center spot. And I'm not going to deny that because I haven't seen those numbers. But if you go back and look through it, I'm sure they're spot on with it. But what I have seen is I have seen a Pavel Buchnevich score 35 goals for the St. Louis Blues. I have seen a Pavel Buchnevich be one of the most underrated wingers in the National Hockey League when he's at his best. And I've also seen his point production dip off when he's played the center position, i.e. last season down the stretch for the Blues. I think the Blues – I don't believe the Blues with Pavel Buchnevich as a second-line center are giving themselves the best shot to have a successful season because I think you're learning on the fly with a guy at the second-line center who potentially could be playing with another guy who's learning on the fly at the NHL level, and Zach Bolduc. I don't know what the top six is going to look like. They've juggled it around a lot. I've said probably since the start of the offseason, maybe back to last year, your best top line is Pavel Buchnevich, Robert Thomas, and Jake Neighbors. To me, that line gives you a couple of things. One, the potential for 230 goal scorers in Jake Neighbors and Pavel Buchnevich. One guy, we've already seen it, and another guy was 3 goals away from it. Two, it gives you a 100-point player in Robert Thomas, because I don't think that's out of the question to say, because there's no streakiness with Pavel Buchnevich and Jake Neighbors. You know what you're getting every single night. 3, it gives you the best option to go up against the other team's top lines. Robert Thomas last season had top 5 minutes at 5-on-5 and the most competitive minutes in the National Hockey League as a centerman. That means he's playing against the McDavids. He's playing against the Crosbys. He's playing against the McKinnons. He's playing against every team's top line. You can't convince me that that line is best suited with Jordan Kyrou or a Zach Bolduc on their wing, because I believe your best line is Pavel Buchnevich and Robert Thomas as a 1-2 punch in the top line. But you also have to go to the other side of the coin of this. I understand what the Blues are doing. Booch is kind of a placeholder until Dalibor Dvorsky's
Yep.
ready, and Dvorsky's not ready for that spot
No.
right now. I personally believe Braden Shen could hold down that fort. I think people are sleeping on Braden Shen. Last year was a off year for him, but in the last 3 seasons, we saw an off year from Jordan Binnington, and he responded with a Vezina-esque type year. We saw an off year from Colton Parayko. He responded with one of the best seasons I've seen from Colton Parayko. Why can't Shen do that? So I don't like it. I don't think it's going to last, but they have a need for a second line center, and Pavel Buchnevich is that guy.
On the topic of the top six, I've seen, a couple good games, but one really good game from Dylan Holloway, and I'm going to be leading the pack if Dylan Holloway should be on the top six. And the lines got juggled today, and he was up there with Robert Thomas. Do you think that's something that could be permanent, or is that maybe just Bannister trying to mix things up with his maybe displeasure for how things have went so far?
I think it's the latter. I think it's his displeasure in juggling some things up. I think there's no denying Dylan Holloway. It wasn't just that last game that was great. I thought he was awesome in that Utah game that he
Yes.
played, where he scored the power play goal. Again, he's one of those guys like Philip Broberg that I have to make sure I'm not getting out over my skates with him, because, is he a potential 20-goal scorer consistently? Probably. I think a lot of people in Edmonton said that he was a more than likely middle six forward with the potential of a top six forward. But I also haven't seen him very much. He's gone up and down with the Edmonton Oilers. I think if you're Drew Bannister, you got to see what works. And right now, it hasn't been working with Kyrou and Thomas, or Kyrou, Thomas, and Bolduc, Neighbors and Thomas and Kyrou. It hasn't been working. So I like the idea of it because Holloway plays a two-way style. He forechecks heavy. He's got a good shot. Neighbors forechecks. Why not see what it looks like? I don't think it lasts, though, because they really like Holloway, Foxa, and Matthew
Yeah.
Joseph. That to me seems like a line that is it's kind of resemblant of what the Blues had when it was Barbashev, Sundqvist, and Steen, to where you just had three guys you threw out there and you knew what you were going to get every single shift, and it set the line mates up for success once the next group stepped on the ice. But you can't keep that line together no matter how much you like it if your top six isn't working. So I'll be curious to see if it sticks tomorrow against Dallas. I'll tell you the other one that was impressive to me in that game against the Columbus Blue Jackets was Texier.
Yes.
Now, it
Yeah.
was one game. I'd like to see more of it, but Texier was forechecking hard. So I think that was Bannister rewarding two guys who have performed well and kind of sending warning shots to a couple of players who weren't doing well in the top six.
And I can't believe I never asked you about Texier. Like, he just plays such a heavy game, I feel like, and he's really strong on the puck. And that's just, it almost feels like it resembles some of these teams from the past few years that maybe something they've been missing. He's had a great preseason so far, and I think he could maybe even be at some point a candidate for that third line center role if they want to kind of keep juggling things.
Yeah, the one thing I know about Texier in the center position is his defensive game isn't great,
Yeah.
and that's where Foxa has that upper hand of playing in that spot, because Fox is a guy that I think he got Selke votes in the past when he was with the Dallas Stars. I didn't know much about Texier either. The only thing I knew about him is every time the Blues played the Blue Jackets, that dude would make you pay. But hearing Aaron Portzline talk of the Athletic about Texier, to where it was a guy that kind of fell out of grace in Columbus. He had some personal matters that he had to handle a couple of seasons ago where he stepped away from the Blue Jackets and then came back, but he was always kind of pigeonholed into a fourth line role. It reminds me a little bit of what they did with Neighbors last year, where Neighbors was a fourth liner, and you're like, wait a minute, Neighbors isn't playing like a fourth liner. Why is he on the fourth line? I don't know if he's a top six forward. Frankly, he's young, so it's an interesting kind of unknown. I do know that when he was playing over in that the play-in game for the Four Nations in the Olympics when he was playing with France, I mean, my dude tore it up. I think he scored a hat trick in one game. He had 3 points in another game. He's got offense. He's fast. He's sneaky big, and he's got a nose for the net, which all plays into what the Blues are looking for. The question is, can you do it in a middle six role like the Blues are going to put him in?
Last thing I got for you, Alex, and again, thank you so much for taking the time to hop on and talk with me. I'm not going to ask you to give me a point total, but I need to know playoffs or no playoffs this year for the Blues, and then who's your leading goal scorer after the regular season's done?
Oh man, you act like I'm scared of that. I'll give you the point
No, I
total.
know you're not.
I'll give you the specifics and everything with this one. Look, I know there's a lot of people that are bullish on this Blues team. I know there's people that are a lot down on this Blues team. Dom from the Athletic, my good buddy. I think he says he believes it's 85 points for them. I
Dom
just don't
always
see
makes
it.
me sad whenever I read his stuff, man.
Yeah, Dom and I aren't friends apparently, but that's okay. He's got his methods, I got my methods. But look, I do think this team is a fringe playoff team. The Western Conference got better around you, and that's going to be the hard part. Here's the thing: I'm not sold on every Western Conference team like everyone else is. I think there are a lot of new faces in Nashville, and as we saw in 2018, 2019, not easy to get a bunch of new faces to mesh well together right away. Um, I think Winnipeg is in a tough spot because when you lose Rick Bowness, that's going to put you in a bind because that is a really good coach to have behind your bench. What does Scott Arniel look like? We saw it in Columbus, and it didn't look well. Um, Colorado did not get better. Frankly,
Nope.
to me, they got worse
Yeah.
because you lost Nichushkin. Landeskog might be back, but he's not 100%. I know they got McKinnon. I know they got Rantanen. I know they got Makar, but they also have Georgiev, and he's not a good goaltender. So I think they'll be always like they are, but I don't know. Dallas is another team that I'm just not sure about because you lost Joe Pavelski, and that is a massive captain for that team. And let's also remember what happened pre Joe Pavelski. How many times did Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin get called out by the Dallas Stars ownership group because they weren't performing like leaders? So, yes, the Western Conference got better on paper. I'm not sold on them being better than what they are. I'm also not sold on the Blues being better than what they were last season. I think there's some unknowns. I know this is a roundabout answer. I think they're a fringe playoff team. I don't think they're a top three in the Central. I think you're a wild card. I've predicted that this team is somewhere between 92 and 94 points. I think you're right around what you were last season. Is that enough to get into the playoffs? 94 barely got into the playoffs
Yeah.
last year, and the Western Conference got better. But can the Blues outperform that 92 94? The real question for them to get to that point is Binnington the same guy? Did your defense improve? And is your power play better? Because if those three things are check mark, check mark, check mark, you're a playoff team, in my opinion. If you don't have those three things this season, you won't be. And welcome to the retool because now you're just going to kind of be resetting it and trying to figure out where to get to next year.
You know, when I've been thinking about it, I'm the same way. I think it's going to be a first or second wild card, and you probably lose in the first round to like a Dallas or Nashville or somebody like that, which I think if that happens, that's a success. If you're getting Broberg, Holloway, all these guys, maybe Dvorsky where that point's up, if you get them playoff experience, like to me, if you can get to that point, huge win for this season. And I think it probably even excels the retool and opens that window even sooner.
You got to get to the playoffs. You
Yep.
got to get to the playoffs. That should be the goal. That's the goal that Doug Armstrong placed on this team because you need the playoff experience. You've got guys who have it. You've got other guys that don't have it. You need it right now in this retool. The wild card to me is going to be very appealing in the Western Conference because LA lost Drew Doughty for a couple of months. That's not an easy thing to miss out on when he's eating 26 minutes a night and scoring you points and playing high minutes for you. So the LA Kings are in that wild card conversation. The Seattle Kraken, the Utah Hockey Club, the Minnesota Wild, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the St. Louis Blues. I think those are your teams fighting for two wild card spots. And if you look at all of them just on paper, I think there's one or two teams that you could sit and say, yeah, you know what, they got better on paper. And to me, it would be Utah and St. Louis.
Yep.
Question is, are you going to take it from paper and actually put it into play? That's what the Blues are going to have to perform this season.
Absolutely. Well, Alex, thank you again. Again, you can catch Alex 11 to 2 weekdays, BK and Ferrario, or you can turn on 101 ESPN during any Blues game, and you'll hear Alex there as well. Thank you so much for the time this evening, man, and we're looking forward to hearing from you this season.
Absolutely, Clay. Thanks for reaching out, buddy. I'm excited for this podcast for you, man. You're going to do a fun job with this. And anytime we can bring more Blues hockey talk to the fans, that's important. So appreciate you reaching out, my man, and good luck this season.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it. Once again, huge thank you to Alex Ferrario for taking some time out of his busy schedule. I know hockey season is really busy for him, so for him to take time to talk with us, I'm very appreciative. Let's go ahead and move on. Game 2 of the season is going to be Thursday night this week. Interesting one. And interesting for many reasons is the fact that you have to beat the San Jose Sharks on Thursday. It's a 9:30 start. As simple as that. You have to take care of business against these teams that you're better than and that you should beat, and that's something that last year's team simply didn't do. They did not beat the Sharks last season, and it's kind of fitting, I think, that it's Game 2 of the year. And the most interesting and intriguing part of that, of this game is it's Macklin Celebrini's debut. There's going to be energy behind it. It's the Sharks' home opener, so a lot to overcome. There's no other way to put it. The Blues are a better team. They are a better team than the San Jose Sharks, and that's not a knock on the Sharks. They're obviously in a full-blown rebuild. They got their exciting guy in Celebrini, the guy they think is going to be exciting. I assume he's going to play. He was injured Tuesday against Utah in the preseason. He was just day-to-day. I think he played another shift after he was hurt. So I think he will be good to go come Thursday night for the Sharks. But it's simple. The Blues have to take care of business. I don't know how many times I can say it. They're just miles better than that team. But looking at it, I think they have a good chance to beat Seattle Tuesday. They should beat San Jose Thursday, and then we look at the third game of the year, second night of a back-to-back in Vegas, Friday night, 9 o'clock Central Time. That's what's interesting about it to me is the fact that it's a back-to-back this early in the year. Vegas did lose some big pieces. We talked about Chandler Stevenson with Seattle now. Jonathan Marchessault, though, he is gone. He is in Nashville, and obviously whenever we get to that part of the schedule, there'll be lots to break down about the Nashville Predators and the moves that they made. But no Marchessault, no Stevenson. They lost some pieces, but it's still a good team. Still got Jack Eichel. They still got Barbashev there, who I think is playing on that top line. Petrangelo, Shea Theodore on the back end. Mark Stone's still there. So it's a good team, simple as that. And it feels like when you go into Vegas, like playing the Knights, and I don't know if it's because they went to the Cup in their first year, and there's this feeling that it's a big game every time you go in there. And it's always a tough game. There's no other way around that. It is a very tough game every time you go in to Vegas to play the Knights. And with it being on the second night of a back-to-back, I have to wonder if Drew Bannister is looking at his goalie schedule. And if I were Drew Bannister, I would go Bennington Tuesday afternoon in Seattle, obviously a season opener. I would roll Hofer out Thursday against the Sharks. I think that would make the most sense. It would allow him to ease into the season. It's his second full year. So I would like to see Hofer Thursday against Seattle, and then you line Bennington up to take on the Knights Friday in Vegas, and then you're off until Tuesday when the home opener against Minnesota. That would be what I do. Again, I'm not Drew Bannister. I'm not the one being paid to make that decision, obviously, probably for better. But I would like to see Hofer Thursday. I think that's a good spot for him to start his season. It's a team that, again, they should beat. But maybe Bannister's looking at this like, hey, we didn't beat San Jose at all last year, so maybe he goes Bennington Tuesday, Thursday, and throws Hofer into the fire Friday night in Vegas. But it's also early in the year. I could see him with having Saturday, Sunday, Monday off, running Bennington out those first three games. That's definitely a possibility. I don't know if that's something they want to do this year with Bennington, but it's something that they definitely could do, is just let him roll in that back-to-back. As a whole, I think 2 wins on the week is what you're looking at. It really wouldn't surprise me if they go 1-1-1. I could see that game against Vegas. I feel like every time they play Vegas, it somehow goes to overtime. But I could see a 1-1-1 week. For better, for worse, if that means they win that game Friday against Vegas. Seattle will be a tough game. But try to pick up a couple wins. Let's start the season on a good note. You know, a 3-game road trip out west, I don't think is ever an ideal way to start the season, but you're not in a bad spot. At least it's at the start of the year. You're getting this out of the way, and then you come home to take on, your first Central Division matchup there with the Wild. Then you get the Islanders, the Hurricanes, and the Jets. So a 4-game homestand before you go out east and up to Canada for a couple games. So big start for the Blues here. They need to get off on the right foot on the road. Looking at this team as a whole in terms of predictions, like I said, I think they're a fringe playoff team. Maybe sneak into a wild card spot. All summer I've just kind of envisioned second wild card team and you lose in the first round to like Dallas. And that's not a bad thing. With the amount of young guys that these guys have on this roster, I think getting them any playoff experience is huge. And we talked with Alex about that. It feels like that would be a massive win for the Blues. Even if they had the same season as last year, they missed the playoffs, they finished with 92 points, I think it's a win because you're developing these young guys, and a lot of guys that are up, the Brobergs, the Holloways, who really haven't gotten a full-time chance in the NHL, getting them playing time. The Blues just need to be competitive. I think if you're falling off to like 75, 80 points, that's not a success, even though these guys are getting playing time. If you can get to 80, 95, 88, 92 points, somewhere around there like you were last year. Huge win, in my opinion, for the Blues, but I do think that they're a fringe playoff team. Second wild card, and like I said, I think they lose in the first round to one of the better teams in the Central. And that's not a knock, and that's not a bad season for the Blues, but I'm incredibly excited for the season to get started. It's going to be an exciting year, a lot to look at. I'm sure Zach Bolduc will probably see some playing time on this road trip. Brenden Saad not going to be there. A lot to look at there. I mean, I think Saad doesn't lose a job, obviously. There's no chance that happens, but you could see a shift if Saad comes back and Bolduc or Kapanen's playing well. Bannister will have some decisions to make on how to juggle the lines in that way, but a lot to look at with this team. That's a young team. They're an exciting team. I think, there's a chance we see Dvorsky at some point this year. Bolduc will probably end up being a regular at some point if he doesn't start the year there. Exciting time. The plan for this, episodes every Sunday is the goal. I'm recording this one right now on a Sunday morning, so episodes every Sunday. And like I said in the beginning, I just want to be able to take a look at the week that was for the Blues, the week ahead, and just anything that pops up in between. Obviously, if something happens in the middle of a week where the Blues make a big trade or something big happens, we'll do like an emergency episode and get something out. But yeah, I think Sundays is kind of a good point to start, just because at the beginning of the year, there's not a ton of Sunday games. If I have to wait to kind of push some to Monday, because I know at some point there are some Sunday home games and Sunday road games, obviously. But that's the goal for now. Thank you all so much for listening in. You can follow me on Twitter at Clay Herrell, the podcast Twitter at Blues Break Pod. And I'm very excited to get this started. If you guys have any, questions, anything you want to talk about the Blues, feel free to reach out on Twitter or to either one of the Twitters. Give me any questions, any feedback. It'd be greatly appreciated. I'm very excited for this journey, and let's go Blues.